My name is Liana, and I'm 38 years old. The day I collapsed at the hospital waiting room was the day I realized who truly cared and who didn't. I've always been the dependable one. The person everyone could rely on. The one who showed up, fixed problems, made sure everyone else was okay even when I wasn't. For most of my life, I believed that being selfless was the same as being loved. I thought that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, people would see my worth. But I was wrong. So very wrong. For years, my younger sister Kelsey had been my biggest responsibility. When our parents passed away, I became her second mother, despite being only 6 years older. I helped her through college, paid her rent when she was struggling, babysat her 2 kids, and even covered her medical bills once. She'd always say, "You're my rock, Liana. I don't know what I'd do without you." But words are cheap when there's no heart behind them. That morning started like any other coffee, emails, and deadlines. I had a big client presentation and a stomach full of anxiety. As a business consultant, my job required confidence, but lately, I'd been feeling the cracks. My chest had been tight for days, but I told myself it was just stress. I ignored it, like I ignored every signal my body tried to send me, because I didn't have time to be weak. I never did. By noon, the pressure in my chest became unbearable. It felt like someone was pressing a heavy brick against my ribs. I told my assistant I needed to step out for a bit and drove myself to the hospital. Each mile felt longer than the last. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and I could barely focus on the road. When I walked into the emergency room, the waiting area was full. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer as I struggled to catch my breath. I told her I was having chest pain and felt faint. She said, without looking at me, "Take a seat. Someone will call your name soon." Her tone was robotic, distant, and cold. I wanted to scream that I couldn't wait, that something was wrong, but my voice came out weak and breathless. I looked around, hoping someone would notice me. I saw a few nurses walking by, some patients waiting patiently, and then I saw her. My sister, Kelsey, wearing her scrubs, chatting with another nurse at the far end of the hallway. Relief washed over me for a moment. "Kelsey!" I called, my voice cracking. She didn't hear me. I pulled out my phone and texted her. "I'm in the waiting room. Chest pain. Please come." The message showed delivered, but no reply came. Minutes passed like hours. The pain intensified, spreading to my arm. I started to sweat, my vision blurring. I leaned on the wall, struggling to stay upright. People glanced at me, but no one moved. I heard laughter from the nurses' station, the sound of life moving on while mine was slipping away. I sent Kelsey another message. "Please, I need help. I think I'm having a heart attack." Nothing. The receptionist finally looked up and frowned when I leaned against the counter. "Ma'am, you need to wait your turn," she said, her tone sharp. "There are others before you." "I can't breathe," I whispered. My voice cracked like glass. But she just sighed and looked back at her computer screen. That moment, the indifference in her face, the silence of the people around me was worse than the pain itself. I'd spent my life helping everyone, yet when I needed help, I was invisible. I staggered toward a chair, clutching my chest. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, faster and faster. Then, everything went black. When I came to, there were voices around me. Someone saying my name, another calling for a doctor. The ceiling lights swirled above me, harsh and blinding. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, like lead. I caught a glimpse of the receptionist, watching from a distance, her expression blank. My breathing steadied as someone placed an oxygen mask over my face. The nurse next to me spoke softly. "You're okay now, ma'am. Just stay still." Her voice was kind, but distant, like someone comforting a stranger. And that's when the reality hit me like a second wave of pain. I was a stranger here, a faceless patient in a sea of others. My own sister hadn't come. The people I had spent years supporting, the ones I thought cared about me, were nowhere to be found. In that sterile room, surrounded by indifferent faces and flickering lights, I realized that no one was coming for me. No one was going to hold my hand or whisper that I'd be okay. I was alone in every possible way, and as that truth settled in, a quiet numbness took over where pain had been. When I woke up, the first thing I saw wasn't comfort or family, it was cold indifference staring back at me. The fluorescent lights above me flickered as I opened my eyes, and the sound of distant chatter reminded me I was completely alone. The sterile scent of disinfectant hit me before I even realized where I was. My eyes darted around the room, landing on the pale green walls, the IV line attached to my arm, and the faint beep of the heart monitor beside me. My throat was dry, my chest sore, and my head spun as memories of collapsing in the waiting room rushed back all at once. The last thing I remembered was calling for help and being ignored. For a brief second, I hoped to see someone familiar sitting by my bedside. Kelsey, maybe, holding my hand and apologizing for not hearing me. But the chair next to my bed was empty. The curtain was half drawn, and I could hear laughter from another room, nurses chatting, someone joking about lunch plans. Life went on, even while I lay there, fragile and forgotten. I pressed the call button beside my bed, needing answers. After a few minutes, a nurse entered. She looked to be in her mid-20s, tired but efficient, her expression unreadable. "You're awake," she said flatly, checking my vitals. "What happened?" I managed to ask. My voice came out weak and hoarse. "You had a mild heart attack," she replied, glancing at her clipboard. "We stabilized you. You're lucky you made it in time." I swallowed hard. "How long have I been here?" 2 days, she said, adjusting my IV. "You were unconscious for a while." 2 days. My heart sank. "Did anyone come to see me?" The nurse hesitated, then shook her head. "Not that I know of." Her voice softened just slightly, but she didn't meet my eyes. "You should rest." And with that, she walked out, leaving me staring at the blank wall, my mind spiraling. 2 days, 2 entire days, and no one came. Not a single call, not a single visit. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. Dozens of notifications filled the screen: emails, work messages, and social media alerts. But when I scrolled through my messages, my heart sank deeper. No texts from Kelsey, not even a missed call. I checked the message thread from the day I collapsed. My desperate texts were still there, unanswered. "I'm in the waiting room. Chest pain. Please come." Then another. "Please, I need help." The messages had been read. She'd seen them. She just didn't reply. The betrayal hit harder than the pain ever did. I called her number, needing to hear her voice, needing some kind of explanation. The call rang twice, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again. This time, it went directly to "call declined." Tears filled my eyes. My sister, the one I'd helped through everything, couldn't even pick up the phone. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking machines and updating charts, but none of them looked me in the eye. I was just another patient, another task on their list. I couldn't stop wondering how many other people lay in these same beds, invisible, waiting for someone who would never come. By evening, a different nurse entered, a kind-faced woman named Donna. She smiled faintly as she adjusted my pillows. "You're Liana, right? I remember you. You collapsed in the waiting room." "Yeah," I said, quietly. "I remember too." Donna sighed. "You were lucky a security guard noticed you when you fell. The ER was packed that day. It's not an excuse, but things slip through the cracks. People slip through the cracks," I corrected softly. She gave me a sympathetic look, then nodded. That night, I couldn't sleep. The beeping of machines, the distant footsteps in the hallway, it all felt like a cruel reminder that I didn't matter here. I thought about Kelsey again. I thought about every bill I'd paid for her, every birthday gift for her children, every night I'd stayed up comforting her through heartbreaks and failures. And now? Silence. I realized, as the clock ticked past midnight, that I had built my entire life around people who only saw me as useful, not valuable. My worth to them ended the moment they couldn't take something from me. When morning came, the doctor visited. He was professional but polite, flipping through my chart. "You're recovering well," he said. "We'll keep you for observation another day or two." I nodded absently, but inside, I was unraveling. "Do you have family support during recovery?" he asked, glancing up. I hesitated, then forced a smile. "Not really," I said quietly. "It's just me." He nodded, clearly unsure how to respond. "Well, take it easy for now. Stress can make things worse." I almost laughed. Stress. If only he knew. When he left, I sat there, staring at the bland hospital meal on the tray, cold eggs and dry toast, and something inside me hardened. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done. Done chasing love from people who only gave me indifference. Done begging for care I'd given so freely my whole life. I opened my phone. Again, this time not to check for messages but to delete them. Every unread text, every unanswered call. I erased the history of disappointment, one tap at a time. That moment felt like shedding old skin. Painful, but necessary. As I lay back on the bed, I made myself a promise. When I walked out of that hospital, things would be different. I wouldn't keep people in my life out of obligation or bloodline. I'd choose who deserved my time, my love, and my loyalty. Because I finally understood something I should have known long ago: sometimes the family you're born with isn't family at all. If my own blood could treat me like a stranger, then maybe it was time I stopped treating her like family. When the doctor finally came in, his tone was calm, but his words hit me like a storm. It had been 3 days since I first opened my eyes in that lonely hospital bed. 3 days of silence, of sterile air, and of unreturned calls. I had spent most of that time staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment I collapsed over and over again, trying to understand how everything in my life had led to that single, humiliating instant. I'd always thought heart problems happened to other people, people older, weaker, less disciplined. But apparently, stress and heartbreak don't discriminate. Patel entered my room with a clipboard in hand. His expression was neutral, the kind professionals wear when they're about to deliver news they wish they didn't have to. "Good morning, Liana," he said. "How are you feeling today?" "Tired," I admitted. "And a little scared." He nodded slowly. "That's understandable. You had what we classify as a mild myocardial infarction, a small heart attack." I blinked, absorbing his words. "A heart attack," I repeated softly, as if saying it aloud might make it more believable. "Yes," he said gently. "It was caused by prolonged stress, high blood pressure, and exhaustion. From your records it seems you've been working a lot lately." "Working," I echoed. "That's one way to put it." He smiled faintly, then turned serious again. "You need to understand something, Miss Alvarez. If you don't make major changes, you might not be this lucky next time." "Lucky," I murmured, glancing at the IV line running into my arm. "That's one word for it." He hesitated before asking, "Do you have family or friends who can support you during recovery?" I looked down at my hands, twisting the thin hospital blanket between my fingers. "No," I said after a moment. "Not really." Dr. Patel's eyes softened. "Well, we have counseling and support groups available if you'd like someone to talk to. Emotional healing is just as important as physical recovery." "Thank you," I said, forcing a small smile. But deep down, I knew what I needed wasn't therapy, it was distance. Distance from the people who drained me, the ones who took and never gave back. When he left, I sat quietly, letting his words sink in. A heart attack, at 38. Because I didn't know how to stop taking care of everyone else long enough to take care of myself. Because I believed that being the strong one made me invincible, but I wasn't. I was human, tired, bruised, and fed up. I thought of Kelsey again. I imagined her going about her day at this very hospital, laughing with coworkers, maybe even walking past my room without realizing I was in here. Or maybe she did realize it and chose not to come. That thought made something inside me twist and burn. My mind wandered back to the years of sacrifice. I remembered wiring her money when she couldn't make rent, sitting beside her when her husband walked out, staying up all night watching her kids so she could rest. I'd been her safety net since she was 18, and she'd used me like one, confident that I'd always be there to catch her. Now, when I needed her, she'd turned her back. My chest tightened again, not from the medical condition, but from the sheer weight of that realization. It wasn't just neglect. It was betrayal. The nurse, Donna, came in a little later with my medication. "You're improving," she said kindly. "Your vitals look better today." "That's good," I said absently. She hesitated, glancing at the door. "I just thought you should know. Your sister was here earlier." Briefly. My heart skipped. "She was?" "She came to the nurse's station asking about you, but when she found out visiting hours were almost over, she said she'd come back tomorrow." "Did she?" Donna looked regretful. "No, she didn't." I smiled bitterly. Figures. After she left, I stared at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked steadily forward, each sound like a reminder that time doesn't wait for anyone no matter how much you give it away. That night, I sat up and wrote in the small hospital notepad they'd left beside my bed. I wrote everything. I felt the exhaustion, the anger, the emptiness. But as I wrote, my words began to change. The pain transformed into resolve. I wasn't going to beg anyone to care anymore. I wasn't going to let people treat me like an afterthought. If this was the wake-up call life had been trying to send me, then I was finally listening. The next morning, I asked to see Dr. Patel again. When he entered, I told him I wanted to take control of my recovery. I wanted to know everything: diet, exercise, medication. I wanted to rebuild myself from the inside out. He seemed impressed. "That's a great attitude," he said. "You'll need to keep your stress low. Avoid toxic relationships and environments. That kind of thing." I smiled faintly. "Oh, don't worry," I said. "That's already on my list." For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to strength, not the kind I used to fake for others, but real, quiet strength that came from self-awareness. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment the old version of me started to die. Because when you almost lose your life, you stop trying to please the ones who never deserved it in the first place. And as fate would have it, I didn't have to wait long to test that new strength. When I saw her walk into my room 2 days later, pretending nothing had happened, I knew exactly what I had to do. Kelsey strolled in with a fake smile, holding flowers she probably bought on discount. It had been nearly a week since I was admitted, and by that point, I'd stopped expecting anyone to visit. I'd accepted that silence was my new companion. But then, on the 7th morning, the door creaked open, and there she was, my sister, Kelsey. Dressed in her usual blue scrubs, hair tied up neatly, the same polite but distant look she wore when she was trying to play innocent. She walked in, holding a small bouquet of daisies. I couldn't help but notice the wilted edges, like they'd been sitting in a clearance bucket all morning. "Hey, big sis," she said lightly, setting the flowers on my bedside table. "You look good." I stared at her, stunned for a moment by her nerve. "Good?" I repeated slowly. "Kelsey, I had a heart attack." She shifted awkwardly. "Yeah, I heard. I've just been super busy, you know? The kids, the double shifts, everything. It's been crazy." Busy. That word stung more than I expected. Busy was what she said every time she didn't want to take responsibility. Busy when she forgot my birthday. Busy when I asked her to visit our mother's grave. Busy when I begged her for help moving after my divorce. Always busy, but never too busy to ask for money or favors. "You work here," I said finally. "In this same hospital. I texted you when I was collapsing in the waiting room." Her eyes flickered. "Oh, I didn't see it. My phone must have been in my locker." "That's interesting," I said. My voice calm but sharp. "Because it showed you read the messages." Her face flushed and she looked away. I didn't mean to ignore you, Liana. I just didn't want to deal with me." I finished for her. There was a heavy silence between us. I could hear the heart monitor beeping steadily beside me, matching the rhythm of my controlled breathing. For years, I'd swallowed my frustration to keep the peace. But in that sterile hospital room, I felt something shift. I was done shrinking myself just to make her comfortable. She finally spoke, her voice small. "I brought flowers." I looked at them again. "Yeah," I said softly, "you did." For a moment, she seemed to relax, thinking the tension was over. But then she sat down and started talking not about what happened, not about how scared she might have been when she found out, but about herself. She complained about her boss, about how expensive groceries had become, about how her ex-husband was late with child support again. I listened in silence, my emotions a strange mix of disbelief and clarity. She hadn't come to check on me. She'd come to complain, to dump her stress the same way she always had. Even now, even after my heart had nearly stopped, I was still her emotional garbage bin. "Do you ever stop to think about how other people feel?" I asked suddenly. She blinked. "What? You always talk about how hard your life is," I said, my tone even. "But you never ask about mine. Not once. Even now, you haven't asked how I'm doing." Her expression hardened. "Oh, come on, Liana, don't make this about guilt. You know I care about you." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because when I needed you most, you were nowhere to be found." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she stood abruptly. "I didn't come here for a fight," she said. "You should rest." And with that, she walked to the door. "Of course," I said softly. "Wouldn't want to waste your precious time." She froze for a split second but didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a sharp click that echoed in the small room. I stared at the wilted flowers on the table. They seemed like the perfect metaphor for us once beautiful, now decaying from neglect. That night, as I watched the city lights flicker through the hospital window, I realized something with startling clarity. Kelsey was never going to change. She wasn't capable of empathy beyond her own reflection. And for the first time, I didn't feel sadness about it. I felt freedom. The part of me that kept making excuses for her, that believed family always comes first, finally died that day. I wasn't going to chase her attention anymore. I wasn't going to beg her to see me. Because when someone shows you their indifference over and over again, it's not your job to convince them to care, it's your job to stop waiting for them to. And I made a silent vow to myself that night. I would get better, not just physically, but emotionally. I would heal without her. And one day, when she finally realized what she'd lost, it would be far too late. But during those weeks, I made a decision that would change everything, especially for her. Recovery was slow, but silence gave me clarity. After Kelsey's visit, the air in my hospital room felt heavier. Her perfume still lingered faintly, sweet but artificial like her concern. I spent another few days there under observation before Dr. Patel finally cleared me for discharge. He gave me a stack of instructions, new medications, diet plans, exercise limits, and a strict warning to avoid stress. Your body's been sending you warnings for years, he told me. Don't ignore it again. But deep down, I knew the real challenge wouldn't be cutting back on coffee or sodium, it would be cutting back on people who drained me. When I walked out of that hospital, the world looked different. The sun was brighter, the air sharper. It wasn't gratitude I felt, it was distance. Every step to my car was a step away from the version of me that believed self-sacrifice equaled love. The first few weeks at home were quiet, too quiet. My apartment had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt foreign, like I was meeting my own life for the first time. I followed my recovery routine religiously. Early mornings, slow walks, balanced meals, medication on time. But the silence between those moments forced me to confront the loneliness I'd been avoiding for years. No calls, no texts, not from Kelsey, not from her kids, not from anyone who had once filled my calendar with favors and urgent needs. It was strange, almost eerie how quickly people forget you once you stop being useful. At first, it hurt. I'd look at my phone, hoping for a message that never came. Then, slowly, the pain turned into something else. Relief. Silence has a way of stripping things down to their truth. And the truth was, I'd been living for everyone but myself. I'd been so busy managing other people's chaos that I'd lost sight of my own life. I started journaling every night, something my therapist had encouraged during my hospital stay. I wrote about anger, betrayal, and exhaustion, but also about gratitude for the second chance I'd been given. Some days my words trembled with pain. Other days they carried the weight of revelation. I wrote about Kelsey, how she'd ignored me in the waiting room, how she'd brushed off my pain. At first, my entries were full of questions. Why would she do that? Didn't she care? But as the pages filled, the questions changed to statements. She doesn't care. She never did. That realization didn't make me bitter, it made me free. I started focusing on small joys. Morning tea on my balcony, the sound of rain on my window, the way my heart didn't race as much anymore. I learned to enjoy my own company. I even started reading again books I'd bought years ago and never touched because I was always too busy helping someone else. My therapist, Dr. Ross, became a voice of reason through it all. She was the first person to say what I had always been too afraid to admit. Liana, love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. Those words stuck with me. I began organizing my life with precision. Not just my health and routines, but my finances too. I spent one afternoon sitting at my desk, surrounded by folders and envelopes, reviewing years of financial records. I was shocked at how much I'd given to others, loans that were never repaid, gifts that were never acknowledged, thousands of dollars gone in the name of family loyalty. I felt foolish for a moment, but then something inside me shifted again. That generosity had come from a good heart. The problem wasn't giving, it was giving to people who only took. One evening, as I was sorting through old paperwork, I found my will. I had written it 5 years earlier, right after my parents passed. Every single asset, my condo, savings, jewelry, investments, was left to Kelsey and her children. I stared at the document, my signature crisp at the bottom, and felt an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. That piece of paper represented decades of misplaced faith. I'd been ready to hand everything to the very person who couldn't even hold my hand when I was dying on the floor. I placed the will on my desk and looked at it for a long time. I didn't tear it up right then, but I made a quiet promise to myself. This would change. Not out of revenge, but out of justice. Because people who treat you like you don't matter shouldn't get to benefit from your life or your death. That thought gave me a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I wasn't driven by guilt or obligation. I was thinking clearly, logically. I wanted to ensure my legacy reflected the person I truly was, not the one everyone else used. As the weeks passed, I got stronger. My walks got longer, my meals healthier, my mind sharper. I smiled more. I slept without anxiety for the first time in years. And even though I had no idea what my future held, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It would not include the same people who had let me suffer alone. Then, one morning during my checkup visit, I met someone who would change the course of my recovery and eventually, my entire life. That's when I met someone who reminded me what real kindness looked like. Harper wasn't family, but she treated me like one. It happened during one of my follow-up appointments at the hospital. I was still nervous about being back there. The smell of antiseptic brought everything rushing back. The memory of collapsing in that waiting room still haunted me. But this time, things felt different. I wasn't the same fragile woman who had begged for help. I was walking in on my own 2 feet, stronger, calmer, and far more aware of what I would and wouldn't tolerate. After my checkup, the nurse mentioned that I'd been approved for outpatient physical therapy to help rebuild my strength. "You'll be working with one of our best," she said. Her name's Harper. The name didn't mean anything to me then, but the moment I met her, I felt an unexpected sense of warmth, like the universe had sent her to me at exactly the right time. Harper was in her early 30s, maybe a few years younger than me. She had kind eyes and a natural gentleness that stood out immediately. She greeted me with a genuine smile, not the practiced kind healthcare workers use when they're too tired to care, but one that reached her eyes. "Hi, Liana," she said, extending her hand. "I've read your chart, but I'd rather hear your story from you. What happened?" Her tone was sincere, curious without being invasive. For the first time in months, someone asked me how I was, not out of duty, but out of care. As we talked, I found myself opening up more than I expected. I told her about the stress, the work, the collapse. I didn't mention Kelsey, at least not yet, but I spoke about how isolating recovery had been. Harper listened quietly, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. She guided me through simple exercises, always encouraging but never pushing too hard. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say every time I hesitated. And maybe because of how she said it, I started believing her. Over the next few weeks, our sessions became the highlight of my routine. We'd talk during stretches and short breaks, and slowly, I learned about her life too. Harper was a single mother raising a 7-year-old boy named Aiden. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, days at the hospital, nights teaching fitness classes at a community center. Despite the exhaustion she must have carried, she was always kind, always patient. There was no bitterness in her voice, no sense of resentment about how hard her life was. She simply accepted it and kept going. That resilience, it reminded me of who I used to be before I let others drain me. One afternoon, after a particularly tough session, I joked, "You make this recovery thing sound easy." She laughed softly. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. Pain teaches you to slow down and appreciate what still works." Her words stuck with me long after I left that day. Soon, our relationship extended beyond therapy. We started getting coffee after sessions. Sometimes she'd bring Aiden along, a bright-eyed boy who adored dinosaurs and had the kind of innocent joy that made me forget my own pain. He'd draw me little pictures and insist I keep them. One of them, a crayon drawing of a woman with a big smile and a red heart, ended up taped to my refrigerator. Harper and I became close quickly, but it never felt forced. She never asked for anything, never hinted at needing help. She was simply present, consistent, and genuine. One evening, as we walked out of the hospital together, she said something that caught me off guard. "You know, Liana, you remind me of my mom. She used to take care of everyone else and never herself. When she got sick, no one was there for her. It broke her heart." That hit me hard. "I understand that," I said quietly. "More than you know." She smiled, a little sadly. You deserve people who show up for you, not just people who expect you to show up for them. That night, I sat in my car long after I got home, thinking about what she said. I realized something simple but profound. Love and loyalty aren't about blood, they're about effort. Harper had no obligation to me. She wasn't my sister, or my friend from years past. She was just a woman who cared because she had compassion, and that made her more family than Kelsey ever was. Over time, my bond with Harper deepened. We talked about everything: her dreams, my regrets, our fears, and the ways life had disappointed us both. There was a quiet strength in her that inspired me. One afternoon, while helping me stretch, she told me about her dream of opening her own physical therapy clinic one day. A place for people who can't afford good care, she said. Where they're treated like humans, not numbers. I smiled. You'd make that happen, Harper. You have the heart for it. She laughed. Maybe one day. But as I watched her that day, tired, kind, and selfless, I felt something spark inside me. Maybe I couldn't change who my sister was, but I could change who benefited from my life. The thought lingered for days, growing stronger each time Harper went out of her way to help me or made me laugh when I was feeling low. She reminded me that good people still existed. People who gave without taking. One evening, I sat at my desk staring at my old will again. My pen hovered over it, and I thought about everything I had. Learned the betrayal, the loneliness, the healing, and now, the kindness. And in that moment, a new idea began to form. Maybe my wealth could go to someone who truly deserved it. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but my decision was light on my heart. By the time I sat down to rewrite my will, it had been 3 months since my heart attack. My recovery was steady, my body stronger, my mind sharper than it had been in years. But more than that, I finally had clarity, a kind of emotional freedom I'd never experienced before. For once, my choices weren't about guilt or obligation. They were about peace. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that morning, sunlight pouring through the window, my coffee growing cold as I stared at the old will in front of me. My name sat neatly on the first page, followed by a list of everything I owned: my home, my savings, my investments, the antique jewelry my mother left me. All of it, every last piece, was marked to go to Kelsey and her children. I ran my finger over her name and felt nothing. No affection, no bitterness, just emptiness. For years I had believed that giving her everything was my way of protecting her, of honoring our parents' memory. But after what happened in that hospital, I couldn't shake the truth. She didn't deserve it. Not the money, not the house, not even the smallest part of what I'd built with my own hands. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, balance. I had spent decades pouring into someone who couldn't be bothered to show up for me when I was fighting for my life. Why should she inherit the life I built alone? So, I called Mr. Dalton, my lawyer. He'd been with my family for years, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes who'd always treated me with respect. When I told him I needed to revise my will, he sounded surprised. "Of course, Liana," he said. "May I ask what prompted the change?" I smiled faintly. Perspective. We met 2 days later in his office, a quiet space filled with the scent of old leather and paper. I handed him my old will, and he placed it neatly on his desk. "What kind of changes are we making?" he asked. I took a deep breath. Significant ones. I explained everything carefully. I wanted to remove Kelsey as the primary beneficiary. Instead, I wanted to divide my assets differently. Half would go toward a charitable foundation supporting women recovering from medical trauma, and the other half would go to someone who had shown me genuine kindness when I needed it most. Mr. Dalton raised an eyebrow. "And who might that be?" "Her name's Harper," I said softly. "She's my physical therapist." He tilted his head slightly. "That's generous. She's the reason I got through recovery," I said simply. "She treated me with compassion when no one else did. She's not family by blood, but she's the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Very well, we'll draft a new document. I'll need details on Harper's full name and information." I provided what I could. Harper had no idea about my plan, and I wanted it to stay that way. This wasn't about making a statement. It was about gratitude, the kind that came from the soul, not from obligation. As Mr. Dalton prepared the paperwork, he glanced up. "Would you like to leave anything to your sister?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said finally. $1. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard me right. $1? I nodded. Legally, that means she wasn't forgotten, but she'll understand exactly what it means. He smiled faintly, understanding. Understood. When he placed the new will in front of me, I felt an unexpected calm. I read through each line carefully, making sure everything was clear. When I reached the last page, where my signature belonged, I hesitated for just a moment, then I signed. It felt like closing a chapter that had been bleeding for far too long. Afterward, Mr. Dalton handed me a sealed copy. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. "Completely," I said. "I've spent my life giving everything to people who wouldn't cross the street for me. It's time I give to someone who actually earned it." He nodded with quiet respect. Then it's settled. When I got home that evening, I placed the sealed copy in my safe. Then, I sat on the couch and stared out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. It felt symbolic, like the closing of one life and the quiet beginning of another. I thought of Harper and her little boy, of their laughter and resilience. I imagined them having a better future because of this decision. And for the first time in years, I felt proud of myself, not for being selfless, but for being fair. But deep down, I knew that peace wouldn't last forever. Life had a way of stirring things up, of exposing truths at the worst possible time. And as fate would have it, my carefully guarded secret didn't stay hidden for long. But fate wasn't done testing me yet because Kelsey found out. I never expected Kelsey to storm into my house screaming about betrayal. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, one of those calm, golden days that almost feel too peaceful to be real. I had spent the morning cleaning and watering my plants, feeling content with my new sense of order. The past few weeks had been blissfully uneventful. My heart felt stronger, my routine steady. I was starting to believe that peace might finally be mine to keep. Then came the pounding on my front door. 3 loud, angry knocks that shattered the stillness. When I opened it, Kelsey stood there, red-faced, breathing hard, eyes blazing with fury. Her hair was a mess. Her phone clutched tightly in her hand like a weapon. "How could you?" she snapped the moment she saw me. I blinked. "Kelsey? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me," she shouted, stepping inside without being invited. "I know about the will, Liana. I know everything." My stomach dropped, though my face stayed calm. "Who told you?" "Does it matter?" she spat. "You changed it. You took me and my kids out. You left everything to some stranger? A physical therapist? Are you insane?" I took a slow breath. Harper isn't a stranger. She's someone who actually cared when no one else did. Her jaw tightened. "So that's it? One person shows you a little kindness, and suddenly she gets everything you own?" "She didn't just show me kindness, Kelsey," I said evenly. "She showed up, when I was lying in a hospital bed, when you were too busy pretending not to see my messages." She crossed her arms. "I told you I didn't see them. Don't lie to me," I said quietly. "They were marked as read." For a moment her anger faltered, then she scoffed. "Oh, come on, Liana. You're really holding a grudge over that? You had a minor heart issue, not a car crash." "You're fine," something inside me snapped. "A minor heart issue?" I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. I was dying, Kelsey. Alone. On the floor of a hospital waiting room. And you walked right past me. You didn't care then, so why do you care now? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came. Finally she said, "Because it's not fair. You know how hard my life is. You know I'm struggling. You're comfortable. You have no one to take care of. Why would you do this to me?" Her words were like knives, sharp, selfish, and familiar. "Do this to you?" I repeated. "This isn't about punishing you, Kelsey. It's about acknowledging what's real. You've taken and taken your entire life, and I kept giving because I thought you'd love me for it. But all it did was teach you to expect more." She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "You're just bitter because you finally realized money can't buy love." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally realizing that love doesn't mean giving everything to people who don't deserve it." For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Years of unspoken resentment filled the space between us. She tried another angle, her tone softening into manipulation, the same tone she'd used since we were kids. "Think about my children, Liana. They're your nieces. Do you really want to leave them with nothing?" My voice stayed steady. "Your children have a mother. You can teach them how to earn things, not just inherit them." Her nostrils flared. "You're cruel." I smiled faintly. "No, Kelsey. I'm finally being fair." She looked around my house, her eyes scanning the furniture, the photos, the life she apparently thought was already hers by right. "After everything I've done for you," she began. I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done for me? Please, name one thing." She froze, mouth open, but silence was her only answer. I took a step toward her. "Every time you called crying, who showed up? Every time you couldn't pay a bill, who wired the money? Every time you said you had no one who was there? Me. Always me. And you repay that by ignoring me when I was begging for help. You lost your right to my generosity that day." Her hands trembled with rage. "You're dead to me," she hissed. I shrugged. "Then I guess we're even." For a moment, she just stood there, her face twisted in anger and disbelief. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house like thunder, but instead of pain, I felt something unexpected: peace. I walked to the window and watched her car speed away, leaving a trail of dust behind it. My heart didn't ache anymore. It felt lighter. I sat down on the couch, letting out a long breath. The confrontation I'd dreaded for so long was over, and for the first time, I hadn't caved. I hadn't apologized for standing up for myself. I realized then that freedom doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes, it comes with letting people walk out the door and not following them. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was liberating. But I didn't know that one last visit to the hospital would make everything come full circle. When the hospital called me again, my heart sank, but not from fear this time. It had been about 4 months since my confrontation with Kelsey. I'd settled into my new rhythm of life, a rhythm built around calm mornings, long walks, and genuine peace. The chaos that once defined my days had disappeared, replaced by silence I no longer feared. I had stopped waiting for people to call, stopped checking for messages that would never come. So, when my phone rang that afternoon, displaying the name of the hospital where everything had begun, I hesitated before answering. For a moment, I wondered if my heart could handle going back there, back to the place that nearly broke me. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Miss Alvarez?" A cheerful voice replied. "This is Rebecca from St. Andrews Medical. We're hosting a fundraising event next month to support cardiac care and patient outreach programs. We'd love for you to share your recovery story as one of our guest speakers." For a few seconds, I didn't say anything. The irony was almost poetic. The same hospital that once ignored me when I was collapsing on their floor now wanted me to inspire donors on their stage. "That's unexpected," I said finally. Rebecca laughed lightly. "Your story really stood out to the staff. They said you've made an incredible recovery. You'd be a wonderful example for others." I thought of those indifferent faces, the cold receptionist, the nurses who walked past me, and my sister who worked under that same roof. Still, something inside me whispered that maybe this was my chance, not for revenge, but for closure. "All right," I said. "I'll do it." Over the next few weeks, I prepared my speech. I didn't write anything dramatic or accusatory. Instead, I focused on resilience, on what I'd learned about slowing down, setting boundaries, and choosing self-respect. Every word came from a place of truth, not bitterness. The day of the event arrived faster than I expected. The hospital auditorium was decorated with red ribbons and banners reading "Heart of Hope Fundraiser." Tables lined the room with donors in suits and nurses in scrubs, chatting and laughing over coffee. Walking through those halls again was surreal. The smell, the lighting, it all brought me back to that day. The difference was, this time, I wasn't the frightened woman begging for help. I was standing tall, composed, and confident. As I waited backstage, a familiar voice called out, "Liana." I turned to see Harper, waving at me from across the room. She looked radiant, her hair tied back, a proud smile on her face. "You look amazing," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you," I told her honestly. "You helped me find strength again." She shook her head. "You had it all along. I just reminded you it was there." Her words filled me with warmth. In a sea of people who had once overlooked me, Harper's presence was proof that compassion still existed. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the podium. The crowd quieted, and for a moment, I took a deep breath and looked around. I spotted a few faces. I recognized doctors, nurses, even the receptionist who'd told me to wait my turn. I began slowly, my voice steady. A few months ago, I walked into this hospital terrified, in pain, and alone. I thought I was dying. What I didn't realize was that part of me needed to. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. Sometimes we don't break down because we're weak. We break because we've carried too much for too long. And when you rebuild yourself, you learn something powerful. You learn who's really there for you. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding, eyes softening. Some people shifted uncomfortably, as if the weight of my words landed closer to home than they expected. I ended my speech not with anger, but gratitude. Healing taught me that kindness isn't about blood or obligation, it's about choice. And I'll forever be grateful to those who chose to show up. When I stepped down, the applause was genuine, echoing through the hall. I saw Harper smiling proudly, clapping harder than anyone. After the event, several staff members approached to thank me. Even the receptionist came up, her expression sheepish. "I remember you," she admitted quietly. "I'm sorry for how things were handled that day. We were overwhelmed, but that's no excuse." I looked at her for a moment and simply nodded. Apology accepted. And just like that, a small piece of the bitterness I'd been holding on to melted away. Harper and I stayed behind for a while, chatting as the crowd thinned out. "You were incredible," she said. "You have a gift for making people feel something real." I smiled. Maybe that's because I finally learned to feel things myself. As we walked toward the exit, I noticed the hospital administrator speaking with a man in a suit. They glanced our way, smiling politely. "Miss Alvarez," the administrator said, approaching. "That was a wonderful speech. Truly moving. I think you reminded everyone why we do what we do." I thanked her, and we exchanged small talk before leaving. The evening felt perfect, almost too perfect. I didn't realize it then, but the peace I felt was only temporary, because the next step in my journey would shatter the calm I had fought so hard to build. The fundraiser had been just one chapter. The real storm was waiting quietly, biding its time, because the will hadn't been read yet, and the real revelation was still to come. When the lawyer read my new will, silence filled the room. It had been 6 months since my heart attack, and nearly 2 since the fundraiser. Life had settled into a steady rhythm, peaceful, predictable, and blissfully mine. I hadn't spoken to Kelsey since our confrontation, and honestly, I hadn't missed her. The quiet in my home no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like freedom. But that peace didn't last forever. One crisp Friday morning, I received a call from Mr. Dalton, my lawyer. "Liana," he said, "it's time we finalize and file your new will officially. For legal reasons, we'll need to do a formal reading with all parties present." "All parties," I repeated, my stomach tightening slightly. "Including Kelsey?" "Yes," he replied. "It's standard procedure." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded to myself. "That's fine. Let's do it." The date was set for the following week. I told myself I wasn't nervous, but as the day approached, I couldn't stop thinking about how Kelsey would react. I knew her well enough to imagine the outrage, the tears, the accusations, but I was ready this time. I wasn't the woman she could guilt into submission anymore. When I arrived at Mr. Dalton's office, the air was heavy with anticipation. The space was as I remembered it: mahogany bookshelves, soft lighting, the faint scent of coffee and old paper. Mr. Dalton stood from his desk, offering a kind smile. "Good to see you, Liana. Please, have a seat." Kelsey was already there. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Instead, she scrolled through her phone, her lips pursed in an exaggerated show of indifference. Her posture screamed arrogance, as if she still believed she owned me, my forgiveness, and everything I had built. "Let's begin," Mr. Dalton said once we were seated. He opened a thick folder and began to read in his steady, professional voice. "This document represents the final will and testament of Liana Alvarez." As his words filled the room, Kelsey relaxed into her chair, confident, smug even. She had no idea what was coming. Mr. Dalton read through the preliminary formalities: first executor appointment, asset verification, legal phrasing that filled the silence like static. Then, he reached the section that mattered. Regarding the distribution of Miss Alvarez's estate, he paused briefly, adjusting his glasses. "The entirety of her property, savings, investments, and personal belongings are to be divided equally between 2 recipients." Harper Lewis and her minor son, Aiden Lewis. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Kelsey's head snapped up. What? She barked, her voice sharp. Mr. Dalton continued, unshaken. Miss Alvarez wishes to acknowledge the kindness, compassion, and genuine care shown by Miss Lewis during her recovery. It is her desire that the Lewis family benefit from her estate in full. He flipped the page. To her sister, Kelsey Harper. Kelsey straightened, her expression a mix of panic and disbelief. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. Miss Alvarez bequeaths the sum of $1. Kelsey's face turned red. $1? She exploded. What the hell is this supposed to mean? I met her gaze calmly. It means you weren't forgotten. Mr. Dalton glanced at me for confirmation before continuing. Additionally, Miss Alvarez has included a personal letter addressed to Miss Harper to be read privately if she wishes. Kelsey snatched the envelope from his hand, glaring at me. You're unbelievable, she hissed. After everything I've done for you, after all these years, you do this? I leaned back in my chair, unbothered. You didn't show up when I needed you, Kelsey. You showed me exactly how much I meant to you that day in the hospital. This is just me returning the truth in kind. She slammed her hand on the table. You're bitter. You've let that one incident poison you. One incident? I said quietly. That was the moment I realized it wasn't one incident, it was a lifetime of them. Her face twisted with rage. And this Harper woman, she just walks into your life and gets everything? She didn't ask for anything, I replied. That's what makes her different. The room fell silent. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat politely. If there are no further questions, I'll proceed with the final signatures. Kelsey was too furious to speak. She grabbed her purse and stood abruptly. This isn't over, she spat. You think you're teaching me a lesson, but you'll regret this, Liana. I didn't flinch. No, Kelsey, I said softly. I already regret giving you so much for so long. She stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her so hard that one of the framed certificates rattled on the wall. For a moment, the room was silent again. Mr. Dalton looked at me, his expression both solemn and approving. You handled that with remarkable composure. I smiled faintly. She's spent her whole life trying to make me feel guilty. It doesn't work anymore. He nodded. Then I'd say this chapter is officially closed. As I left his office, I felt lighter, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd carried for years. The sky outside was a pale shade of blue, the kind of calm color that promised new beginnings. I knew Kelsey would be furious, maybe even vindictive, but I wasn't afraid. I had lived through worse, through heartbreak, betrayal, and near death. Whatever came next, I could handle it. What I didn't know, though, was that my sister wasn't going to let this go quietly. But Kelsey wasn't done with me yet. The messages started the next day, angry, threatening, desperate. At first, I ignored them. I told myself that Kelsey was just venting, that she'd calm down once the shock wore off, but I underestimated how deeply greed could twist a person. Each message that popped up on my phone was more venomous than the last. You're heartless. How could you do this to your own family? Mom and Dad would be ashamed of you. The guilt she was trying to plant in me didn't take root this time. I'd spent too many years letting her manipulate me. Too many nights staying up crying over her cruelty disguised as concern. I wasn't that woman anymore. Still, her words stung. Not because they were true, but because they reminded me of how long I'd believed they were. When I didn't respond, she escalated. She called repeatedly, sometimes 10 times in a row. I'd see her name flashing across the screen, Kelsey, and my chest would tighten, not with fear, but with exhaustion. I blocked her number, hoping that would end it. It didn't. A few days later, she started using different numbers. Then came the emails, then the social media posts. She wrote vague but pointed messages about selfish sisters and betrayal disguised as enlightenment. Some of our distant relatives reached out to me after seeing them. Liana, what happened between you and Kelsey? One cousin asked. She seems really upset. I laughed bitterly. Of course she is. I stopped letting her use me. The more I ignored her, the angrier she became. Her tone shifted from self-pity to outright threats. You'll regret this. Don't think you can just erase me from your life. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. One night, as I sat reading in my living room, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Liana? The voice on the other end was low, shaky. Kelsey, I sighed. You need to stop this. You think you're better than everyone now? She spat. You think giving your money to some random woman makes you noble? This isn't about money, I said calmly. It's about peace. You had years to treat me with love. You chose not to. You owe me, she shouted. You owe my kids. No, I said quietly. I owe myself. There was a long pause. Then she laughed bitterly. You'll die alone. Liana, just remember that. I hung up before she could say another word. When I put the phone down, I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad either. I just felt done. Her words no longer had power over me. They were echoes of an old wound that had finally healed. Over the next few weeks, I kept living my life. I continued my physical therapy with Harper, met with my book club, and even started volunteering at a community center. My world was smaller now, but it was full of real people, people who gave without taking. Kelsey's noise eventually began to fade. She stopped calling. The emails stopped. The social media posts disappeared. At first, I thought it was just the calm before another storm, but weeks passed, and she remained silent. Maybe she'd finally realized that she couldn't control me anymore. Or maybe she'd simply moved on to blaming someone else. Either way, I was grateful for the quiet. I started sleeping better, waking up without the heaviness I used to feel. My mornings were peaceful coffee on the porch, the sound of birds, and no vibrating phone full of venom. Sometimes, I'd still think of Kelsey. Not with hate, but with pity. She was trapped in a cycle of resentment that she'd never escape because she refused to look inward. She wanted everyone else to be the villain in her story. One afternoon, I ran into our cousin Jenna at the grocery store. She gave me a sympathetic look. I saw Kelsey last week, she said. She didn't look good. She was upset, said you'd turned on her. I nodded. I didn't turn on her. I just stopped letting her turn on me. Jenna smiled, sadly. She doesn't see it that way. I know, I said softly. She never will. As I loaded my groceries into the car that day, I realized something profound. Peace doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes, it's just the decision to stop participating in someone else's chaos. And I had finally done that. In the months that followed, my life grew even brighter. Harper's friendship became a cornerstone of my days. We laughed often, celebrated small victories, and even took Aiden to the park on weekends. For the first time in years, my heart felt truly light. The bitterness was gone. But just when I thought that chapter was finally closed, life had one more twist in store for me. A letter arrived in my mailbox one morning, handwritten, the kind of thing people don't send anymore. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was shaky, familiar, and full of regret. But life had one more surprise waiting this time, a good one. Months later, Harper came to visit me with tears in her eyes and gratitude in her heart. By then, life had found a gentle rhythm again. The chaos with Kelsey had faded into the background, like an old song I no longer needed to hear. I still had the letter she sent me sitting unopened on my dresser, but I wasn't ready to read it yet. Maybe I was afraid of reopening wounds that had finally scarred over. Or maybe I already knew what it said, and I didn't need her words to validate my peace. Instead, I focused on living quietly, intentionally. My mornings began with soft music and sunlight streaming through my kitchen window. I had started writing again, not for anyone else, just for myself. Reflection had become my new form of therapy. One morning, I got a call from Harper. Her voice sounded a little different, breathless, almost emotional. Liana, she said, can you come by the hospital later? There's something I need to show you. Her tone made me curious. Of course. Is everything okay? She laughed softly. Better than okay. You'll see. When I arrived that afternoon, the hospital lobby looked unusually lively. Balloons, banners, and a crowd of smiling faces filled the space. For a moment, I wondered if I'd walked into the wrong building. Then I saw her Harper standing by a newly painted sign with bold letters that took my breath away. Liana's Hope Rehabilitation Center. For a moment, I couldn't move. My throat tightened as I read the words again and again, my name glimmering in gold above the entrance of a newly renovated wing. Harper turned toward me, her eyes glistening. Surprise? She said softly. I blinked, stunned. What is this? She smiled through her tears. It's my dream, Liana. Remember how I told you I wanted to open a clinic someday? Well, because of you, I did. This place, this whole wing, is dedicated to helping women recovering from illness or injury who can't afford therapy. It's free for them. Completely free. My eyes welled with tears. Harper, I whispered, speechless. She took my hands. I used part of the inheritance to fund it. The rest went into a foundation, something sustainable that'll keep it running for years. I couldn't think of a better way to honor what you gave me. I felt my chest tighten, but this time, it wasn't pain. It was pride. Deep, overwhelming pride. Around us, people clapped as the ribbon-cutting ceremony began. I was asked to stand beside Harper, scissors in hand, while photographers captured the moment. The flash of cameras reflected off the glass walls, but all I could see was the sign with my name. For the first time in my life, it wasn't about ego, it was about meaning. After the applause faded, Harper pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "You gave me more than money. You gave me hope. You believed in me before anyone else did." I shook my head, smiling through tears. "No, Harper, you gave me hope. Reminded me that kindness doesn't need blood ties to be real." She smiled, that familiar, gentle curve of her lips that always made me feel safe. "You've changed my life, Liana. And Aiden's too. He's been saving his allowance to buy you something special, but, well, he got impatient." I laughed softly. "Oh no, what did he do this time?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "He made this for you." I opened it and found a crayon drawing Aiden's handwriting scrawled across the top. "Thank you for helping my mom help other people." My heart melted. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed that simple affirmation. That reminder that what I'd done had rippled outward into something beautiful. The next few hours passed in a blur of hugs, smiles, and speeches. Doctors and nurses came up to thank me for my generosity, though the truth was, I hadn't done any of it expecting recognition. I had simply redirected my love from people who wasted it to people who multiplied it. As I walked through the new facility with Harper, I noticed every thoughtful detail she had added. The rooms were warm and inviting, painted in calming shades of blue and cream. There were inspirational quotes on the walls, cozy chairs, and even a play area for children. It wasn't just a clinic, it was a sanctuary. I stopped at one of the therapy rooms, where a woman in her 40s was practicing walking with assistance. Harper smiled at me. "She's one of our first patients. Lost her husband a year ago, had a stroke right after. She told me today that this place makes her feel human again." Tears filled my eyes once more. "You're doing something extraordinary, Harper." "So are you," she said softly. "You made this possible." We stood there for a moment, two women connected not by blood, but by shared strength and healing. Later, as the event began to wind down, Harper leaned closer and whispered, "There's someone here to see you." I frowned, glancing toward the crowd. "Who?" She nodded toward the back of the room, where a figure stood partially hidden by the doorway. I turned and froze. It was Kelsey. She looked thinner, older somehow. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she was clutching her purse nervously, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. My breath caught. I hadn't seen her in months. I'd imagined our next meeting would be filled with venom, but there was no anger in her eyes this time, just sadness. Harper touched my arm gently. She said she just wanted a moment. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding as old wounds threatened to resurface. And among them, I saw someone I never expected to see again. Kelsey stood at the back of the crowd, her eyes full of tears. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Time seemed to stop around us, the conversations, the music, even the laughter from the nurses nearby all faded into silence. All I could see was my sister, the same woman who had once screamed that I was dead to her, standing just a few feet away, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. When our eyes met, she gave me a tentative smile, shaky, uncertain, the kind that carried years of unspoken pain. Harper gave my arm a gentle squeeze before quietly stepping aside, giving us space. Kelsey hesitated for a long time before walking toward me. Each step looked heavy, as if she were carrying the weight of everything she'd done. When she finally reached me, she took a deep breath, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," I replied softly. Her eyes darted to the sign behind us, Liana's Hope Rehabilitation Center. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw the story about it online. I didn't know you." She stopped mid-sentence, swallowing hard. "You did something incredible." I didn't respond right away. I was waiting for the excuses, for the manipulation, for the version of her that always found a way to twist sincerity into guilt. But for once, she didn't. She just stood there, raw and exposed. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, her voice breaking. "A real one." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I was horrible to you, Liana," she continued. "When you were sick, when you needed me, I wasn't there. I told myself I was busy, that I'd see you later, that it wasn't serious. But deep down, I knew what I was doing. I just didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to see you weak because it made me feel guilty for all the ways I'd leaned on you." Her honesty stunned me. For years, I'd prayed for her to take accountability, to admit the truth. And now here she was, voice shaking, tears running down her cheeks, saying the words I thought I'd never hear. "I saw the news about the will," she said quietly. "I was angry, furious, actually. I said terrible things, things I can't take back. But when I saw what you did with it, when I saw this place," she gestured toward the clinic, "I realized you didn't do it out of spite. You did it out of love. Just, not for me." That last sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She wiped her eyes quickly. "I've spent months thinking about everything that happened. About the hospital, the calls, the messages. I was so focused on what I thought you owed me that I never stopped to ask what I owed you." She took a shaky breath. "And now I see it. I see all of it. You didn't deserve the way I treated you." Tears welled in my eyes, unbidden. My instinct was to comfort her, to say it was okay, that we could just move on. But this time, I didn't rush to make her feel better. I let her sit in it, because she needed to. Because I had learned that forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't about forgetting, it's about finally being seen. "I'm sorry, Liana," she whispered again. "Not just for what I did at the hospital, but for every time I made you feel small when you were the only person who ever stood by me. I can't undo it, but I promise I'm trying to be better for my kids. And for myself." Her words cracked something open in me, something that had been locked away for years. I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Kelsey," I said softly. "It takes courage to admit what you just did." She looked up, surprised. "You're not angry?" I smiled faintly. "I was, for a long time. But anger's heavy, and I carried it long enough. I won't pretend what you did didn't hurt, but I also can't carry that pain forever. It's exhausting." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not yet," I said honestly. "But you're here. That's a start." For a moment, we stood there, surrounded by the soft hum of the crowd. Two sisters who had finally stopped fighting long enough to remember what love once felt like. Then she did something that completely caught me off guard. She reached out and hugged me. It wasn't one of those stiff, obligatory hugs. It was real tight, trembling, full of everything we hadn't said for years. I felt her tears soak into my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself cry too. When we pulled apart, there was a strange peace between us. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't final, but it was real. She looked at me through glassy eyes. "Thank you for listening," she said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you for coming." She smiled faintly, and for the first time since we were kids, it felt genuine. She glanced at Harper in the distance and then back at me. "You found good people, Liana. You deserve them." As she turned to leave, I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. I knew we might never be close again, but maybe that was okay. Maybe peace didn't mean going back to what we were, it meant accepting who we'd become. I watched her walk away, the afternoon sunlight catching the edge of her hair, and I realized something powerful. I wasn't defined by her neglect anymore. I was defined by how I chose to heal. And I had chosen well. But even as I walked away, I knew the real ending wasn't about revenge, it was about freedom. Today, when I walk past the mirror, I see someone new, not the woman they ignored, but the woman who learned to stand tall again. It's strange how life can circle back, how pain can evolve into peace if you let it. Months have passed since the day I saw Kelsey at the clinic. We haven't spoken much since then, just a few texts here and there. Mostly small check-ins, polite and restrained. But that's okay. I don't need daily conversations or grand gestures. Sometimes peace means loving people quietly, from a safe distance. My days now are simple, and I've learned to appreciate that simplicity. I wake up early, make coffee, and sit by my window as the sun creeps over the city skyline. There's a quiet kind of joy in stillness, a joy I never allowed myself when I was always rushing to fix everyone else's chaos. I spend some mornings volunteering at Liana's Hope, watching the women Harper and her team help. Seeing them walk again, laugh again, breathe again, it fills me with a satisfaction no amount of wealth ever could. Every smile in that building reminds me why I made the choices I did. My legacy isn't measured in money, it's measured in impact. Harper and I have become inseparable in the most unexpected, beautiful way. She's not just a friend anymore, she's family. Her son, Aiden, has practically adopted me as an honorary aunt. He calls every few days just to tell me about school or a new dinosaur fact he's learned. Every time I hear his giggles, it warms a part of me I once thought was permanently frozen. Sometimes, I think about the old me, the one who lived for validation, who gave and gave until there was nothing left. I want to reach back through time and tell her that love given to the wrong people is never wasted. It just teaches you who deserves the next piece of your heart. The last time I saw Kelsey was at a small family gathering our cousin Jenna hosted. It was awkward at first. She kept her distance, unsure of how to talk to me. But then she came over, her eyes softer than I'd seen in years. "You look good," she said quietly. "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it when I smiled. There was no resentment, no tension, just understanding. She told me she'd started therapy. She was trying to rebuild her life, to be a better mother, a better person. I could see it in her, she wasn't there yet. But she was trying, and that was enough. Before she left, she hugged me again. This time, it wasn't about apology or guilt. It was just human. It felt like closing the door on years of chaos and opening a window to something new, something gentler. Later that evening, as I drove home, I caught a glimpse of the hospital in the distance, the same one where everything began. Its lights glowed against the darkening sky, and for a moment, I felt the weight of that memory, the fear, the pain, the loneliness. But instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. Because if that day hadn't happened, I never would have changed. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the very thing that sets you free. I pulled over near the hospital parking lot, sat there for a while, and just breathed. The same building that once symbolized neglect now stood as a reminder of rebirth. I had been ignored, yes, but I had also survived. And from that survival, I had rebuilt a life defined not by who left me behind, but by who stayed. A few days later, Harper invited me to speak at a small event at the clinic. It wasn't anything grand, just a gathering of patients, families, and volunteers. I hesitated at first. Public speaking still made me nervous. But then I remembered how far I'd come. When I took the stage, I didn't prepare a speech this time. I spoke from my heart. I used to think strength meant giving endlessly, I said, my voice steady. That it meant being everyone's savior. But strength isn't about how much you give, it's about knowing when to stop giving to people who only take. Healing doesn't start when others apologize, it starts when you decide you deserve peace. The audience was silent. A few people wiped away tears. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the woman who was ignored in the waiting room. I felt like someone who had finally learned what it meant to be seen by herself. Afterward, Harper came up and hugged me. "You have no idea how many lives you're changing," she said softly. I smiled. Maybe, but mostly, I'm just changing mine. Now, when I walk through the hallways of Liana's Hope, I run my fingers along the walls, feeling the heartbeat of a place built on compassion instead of greed. It's proof that sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud, it's living well. It's turning pain into purpose. I still think about my parents sometimes, wondering what they'd say if they saw me now. I like to believe they'd be proud that they'd understand why I had to make the choices I did. Maybe they'd even whisper, "Finally, you chose yourself." As for Kelsey, I've forgiven her, even if she'll never fully grasp the depth of what she did. That forgiveness isn't for her, it's for me. Because holding on to anger only keeps you tied to the past, and I have no desire to live there anymore. These days, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who rebuilt her world from the ashes of neglect. A woman who learned that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. And most importantly, a woman who finally understands that peace is the most precious inheritance of all. The hospital may have ignored me. My sister may have betrayed me. But I came out the other side not as a victim but as someone free. And that, I realized, was the truest form of justice.